Welcome to Raising the Bar, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the country's most successful leaders and how they elevate their business and their teams. Please welcome our host, Alison DePauli.
Welcome, everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome you back to Raising the Bar with Alison DePauli, where we talk to CEOs and founders who have raised the bar in their businesses, their lives, and their communities. And it is my pleasure to welcome Steve Cunningham today. He is the founder of Read It For Me. If you don't know what that is, we'll drop a link in the show notes so you can figure it out. But it is a fantastic resource for keeping up with your reading. And he is also the new founder of something called WeTree, which is an app that helps manage, track well-being, anxiety, social connection, and I think can be a game changer for individuals and employers. So we'll drop a bio and links to WeTree in the show notes as well. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Allison. Great to be here.
So you are a reformed lawyer and you used to read a book a day, but you're still quite an avid reader. Tell me just a little bit about how Read It For Me got started.
I'll try to give you the short version. So I always start off my story with, I was a lawyer for exactly 1 week.
Yep.
That's a longer story for a different day. I graduated from law school, joined the family business, which at the time was a small signage company. And I had no idea how to run a business. I joke that law school does a bad job of preparing you to be a lawyer, and even worse job of preparing you to run a business.
Yep.
So I went to the bookstore, and my father had made me the president of this company very quickly because it was a very small company. So I was super stressed. I went into the bookstore to try to learn as much as I could, as fast as I could. And so as I was reading those books, I would make summaries of them for myself, because that is what I had done in law school for 3 years. You get assigned a whole bunch of reading and you have to summarize stuff quickly so that the next day you're not embarrassed in front of all your friends at law school. So I got good at that, but I was just kind of, doing what I was habitually doing. Around that time, which was when social media started to come out and start to become a tool that businesses were starting to think about using, I had a few thousand Twitter followers at the time, and that, quote unquote, qualified me to be an expert. So I got to go speak to a whole bunch of different companies. That led me to create a digital marketing agency. And as I was giving these keynotes, I would get a lot of requests for people to visit and think about how we could serve those companies that I was presenting to. And so I met with business owners, VPs of marketing, and so on. And so when I got to those meetings, there would invariably be a stack of books on their desk. And I had invariably read one or two or three of them. And because I just had gone through all of the fresh content that was on the market. And so I would try to create a little rapport with people I was talking to. So I'd say, hey, what did you think about that idea from that book, or this idea from this book? And they would eventually all sheepishly admit that they hadn't read the book, their boss had given it to them, or they just haven't got around to reading it, they're too busy, and there's always an excuse. And so the rapport backfired, but what I realized is that I had this trove of information that I could use to send them. So I would send them the book summaries that I was creating. So I said, hey, here's a book summary of that book. Hope it's useful for you. And eventually that led us to the idea of, because we're having a really hard time closing deals for social media and digital marketing, we said, well, we got to do our own case study. So then we can come back to them and show them exactly, here's how we did it, here's how you can use it to grow your business, and so on, step by step. So we took some of the summaries I was creating, turned them into a video, posted them on a blog, which we thought would drive traffic back to our website, and then get them the book meetings to talk to us about digital marketing. It was content marketing before anybody was doing content marketing. We didn't know what it was. We just thought this was a good idea. So we sent it out to 10 people. That turned into 100, turned into 1,000. And so the thing that we had hoped to create worked, but an unintended outcome was that people started asking us, can we pay you for these summaries? So, yeah. So, and I was not a very sharp guy at the time, still not a very sharp guy. It takes me a while to pick up on patterns and things. So, because initially I would tell them, this is not a business. This is, we're just doing this. This is marketing for this other thing over here. So no, you don't have to pay for us for the content. Don't worry about it. And then they would say, and some of them were wise enough to tell me, like, listen, I'm worried that you're going to stop doing this if you don't turn it into a business. I really love what you're doing. How do I pay you? So that was the cue for, okay, well, let's try to make this a business and see what happens. We put up a PayPal paywall to see if people would give us their credit card. And lo and behold, people started doing it, and voila, we had a business.
Yes, you do. You've been a resident in my inbox for some time. So how did, let's move forward a little bit, because you've had Read It For Me for some time, and WeTree is quite new. And not only is it quite new, it was a very quick iteration and a very quick idea to market. So tell me a little bit about how that happened.
Well, I'll go back a couple of years to give you kind of the where the seed was planted originally, and then I'll talk to you about kind of how we've launched it in a compressed time period here this year. So a couple of years ago, I'd been diving deep into the idea of goal setting, and like setting goals and working towards them is obviously a good thing to do. We do this as human beings, but I wanted to figure out how could we use goal setting as a way to understand what people were truly passionate about. And so I'd read a book that had listed, here are the 12 areas that people typically will set goals in. And I created a quick survey and I sent it out to a bunch of folks. One of the goal areas included the regular things like where do you want to be in your career? Like what are your financial goals? But one of them was also what are emotional and psychological goals? And I had no idea what we would get back. But what I noticed was that every single person that filled out that survey, which included people that I knew incredibly well, like my family and friends, but also included complete strangers, every single one of them said something along the lines of, I'm struggling with fear and anxiety. Some people admitted to being depressed and that they were on medication. And a lot of these were people that I knew. And I had no idea that the people that I knew so well were struggling with these things. And somehow they, for some reason, had never told me this before. But as soon as I sent them a Google form, they felt like they could express that to me.
It's very odd. Mental health issues, from what I've seen, are a very interesting combination of I'm not going to talk about it and I'm going to shout about it. And I think that's a very interesting dichotomy, and you've really tapped right into the middle of that.
Yeah, we've noticed that there's some sort of barrier that gets dropped when it doesn't have to happen, when the disclosure of the issue doesn't have to happen face to face. So when the first time you tell people about what you're wrestling with, and sometimes it's only one or two words, like they don't write about it, but they're just like dealing with fear and anxiety, or I'm depressed, or some way to let people know that there's something going on. So at the time, I had no idea what to do with that information, because first it was relief, like, wow, I guess everybody feels like I do. That's a relief. But now what do I do with this information? How do I talk to people about it? And it just became an incredibly awkward thing for me to do. So I didn't do it. And it wasn't the point of what I was doing. So it just kind of became a sidebar that was kind of rattling around in my head. So fast forward, not too much after that, COVID hits. And of course, I know that everybody is struggling. And I know that publicly people are sharing that things are great. Look at all the things we're doing with the family and posting on Instagram and all those things. So I wondered, how can I get the people that I care and love to talk about these things? And I took a deep dive into mental health and psychology, and found in particular interest in the positive psychology movement. And it was founded by a man by the name of Martin Seligman, who was the past president of the American Psychological Association. And he had created this framework for, and it's a book called Flourish, that deconstructs kind of what a flourishing life looks like, and these different elements. And his point was that it was more than just happiness, because that's what most people think about when they think about mental health or well-being. It's like, well, we want to feel happy. But what he found was that it was actually a combination of a bunch of different elements. And so he created an acronym called PERMAH, PERMAH, which stands for positive emotion, engagement, meaning, accomplishment. Did I miss one? No, yeah, I did. For relationships, so PER, the R is relationships, accomplishment is the A, and the practitioner community tacked on H at the end of it. That wasn't in his book, but physical health obviously interacts with your mental health in very significant ways. So the practitioner community tacked that on at the end. So we got these 6 elements of well-being and flourishing. And so obviously, if you've got a lot of those things going on in your life, you're doing well. If you have none of those things going on in your life, you're really struggling. So we thought, well, and in the interim, one of my co-founder of the company, a gentleman by the name of Lorenzo Gomez, who was at the dentist today, so unfortunately couldn't make it. Which maybe we'll get into in a few minutes. We take so much more care of our teeth than we do our mental health. That is it's a weird thing. That part of what we're hoping to change with this app. So he had written a book about mental health and called Tafoya Toro, and he grew up in a tough neighborhood in San Antonio and has seen a lot of things that most of us will never have to deal with in our lives. And he talked about his struggles with that. And so that for me was like, well, now somebody in I would consider a close friend of what we'd call going first, kind of bearing what he was struggling with to a wide audience. And so that gave me the idea to reach out to him early this year to think about like how can we take these ideas we have over here and the work that you've done over here and create a tool that can help people talk about what they're struggling with and get support from their community. So it started off as a Google document in February, a Google form. So we sent out, okay, here's the PERMAH elements. We tacked on 2 open-ended questions at the end of it that we knew were important from the research that we had done. One of them was, what are you grateful for today? So most folks by now are familiar with the idea of keeping a gratitude journal and how important that could be for your mental health. And then the last one was also, what do you need help with? Because most people have an issue asking for help. But like I said earlier, there's this psychological barrier that gets dropped when the ask is not face-to-face. So people feel comfortable asking for help when they don't have to see the reaction live. So that was a hypothesis. We had no idea whether or not anybody would ever fill it out, how engaging would the process be. But the idea was that if you did this on a daily basis, we would now have real-time information about how each other are doing. And when you need help, I can reach out to you. When I need help, you can reach out to me. And that's a way for us to create a relationship or deepen our relationship. So the Google, that experiment went really well. And then so that was February. And in March, we created a real stripped down beta version of a web app and started adding people into a beta. That went really well. So in April, we launched a web version of the app and started taking customers on a limited basis. And in May the 2nd, we launched formally. And here we are. A couple of weeks later, you heard about it, I think through the news, and or maybe it was through the email that landed in your inbox. But the reaction has been incredible. We've, like I said in our pre-interview, kind of been parachuted into a bunch of different worlds that we never would have expected to be parachuted into, because this is something that that everybody is wrestling with. So it's a broad need.
My clients are employers, and I do not have an employer who has not expressed concern about the mental well-being of their workforce across the board. Line, mid-level managers, senior managers, everybody seems to be just in a place where they're barely hanging on. And I don't mean to be particularly depressing about that, but I think people just don't know what to do. And even now, people don't know what to do, even though we are mostly out of being shut in our houses. And every employer I know is like, what do we do? How do we do this? How do we get resources to people? It's an incredibly complex question.
Yeah, and not to not to pile on with the depressing stats and stuff, but what I've spoken to a lot of mental health and just healthcare experts in general, and what everybody is predicting is that even, you would think that everything was going to get better because we're coming out of the pandemic. Like things are going to go back to normal. And what they're saying is actually we're just at the beginning of the mental health crisis, because it's been building up for these at least 2 years, and everybody's getting to a boiling point, and the healthcare system simply isn't ready for what is about to happen. And so, rightly so, people are worried about it, and it's going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately.
Yes. And we do not have enough providers. I'm going to pile on a little bit more. We don't have enough providers, and we don't have enough primary care providers who can help with this is not the right way to say it, but lower level stress kind of things that can be addressed in a conversation, and address the things like, get some sleep, eat properly, move around a little bit, and that sort of intersection between physical and mental health. We simply do not have enough providers, and it is going to be a huge issue. So I think you're quite timely in what it is that you're doing. I know you have been surprised at some of the places that you have landed. What is the most surprising place that somebody's reached out to you from?
So we're doing some work with some organizations that are dealing with veteran suicide issues. Mm-hmm. So, people who are, in at-risk communities. And so that was incredibly surprising to us. The first person we talked to about this in the business context said, this really should be used in that world to combat suicide, which for us was like a really heavy thing. Like I had not even for a second considered this to be a tool that could help with suicide. And the stats are scary around what's going on, not just in the veteran community. They're doing a good job of addressing it, so that's an issue there. But just in general, a couple of stats that I had a hard time believing when I first heard them. Like I think it's something like 18% of teenagers have actively planned out how they would commit suicide, mm-hmm. and 8 or 9% of them have actually tried. Yes. And as somebody who has a daughter who's just turned 13 this year, and I got another one who's getting close, that's a scary thought. And I never would have imagined that we're dealing with a 1 in 5 issue where things are so bad mentally, emotionally, that they know how they're going to do it. It's not even just thinking about it, like they know how they're going to do it. And so that was very surprising to us, but also on the flip side, so the app itself is designed to, we say, share your true self and support your inner circle. So technically what you'll do is you'll go in and take a daily pulse. It takes you 30 seconds to do, answering how you're doing on a scale from 1 to 5 on those 6 elements, plus answering those 2 open-ended questions. And then
those 2 open-ended questions are, what are you grateful for and what do you need help with?
Correct. Yeah. And so then you go, if that takes 30 seconds, we call it the mental health minute. And then the next 30 seconds is I would go see who is in my inner circle, which would be people that I have connected with on the app to proactively share these check-ins with, and take 30 seconds to see who might need to hear from me today. And so if somebody's got a lot of red in their profile, if somebody has disappeared from the app for a period of time, those are indications that those are the folks that you might want to follow up with. And so that's how we designed the app before even knowing anything about the places and organizations that were dealing with suicidal folks. And the research is staggering on the bad end, but it's also staggering on the good end. And there is an idea in that world, it's called caring contacts. And the idea is, and it stemmed from a guy who, by the name of Jerome Motto, who was in his experience in World War II, and he had received letters from, I think it was a pen pal or somebody back home, consistently during the war. And that had just knowing that there was somebody back home caring for him made a huge impact on him. And so we thought, as he was a psychologist and he was working with patients, like, well, maybe we can do something like that for these people, just to make sure that there's at least one person on the planet who's thinking about them. If everything else is not going well, there can be one person that, and it is quite simply, and anybody that had worked with that person would type a letter saying, simply like 1 or 2 sentences, thinking about you, want you to know that we care about you, hope things are going well. That's it. They've replicated, and they found through that research that it cuts the incidence of suicide in half. If you send, it's something as low as 8 contacts like that over 12 months.
Wow.
A ridiculously low bar for saving half of those lives. And they've replicated that using text messages. So it's been replicated many times. And I think it is the only intervention that has been proven to have a significant impact on the incidence of both suicide and suicidal ideation. And so the idea with the app is that rather than on random intervals, you can check in on somebody when in the moment that they have a need. And if it works for strangers, it could work for your friends and your family. And there's an overwhelming amount of research that shows that the solution to all these issues is to build stronger, close relationships. And that what we're hoping and what we're seeing our tool being able to do is to help deepen relationships that already exist, helping folks find people to bring into their inner circle to build these structures. And the impacts are wide ranging, all the way down to, like, it cuts down incidence of cancer, of early death, of Alzheimer's. It's the connection between your mental health and your long-term physical health is something is remarkable, and it's something that not a lot of people know about. I didn't know about any of this until January or February of this year. So yeah, we're kind of right place at the right time with a tool that, when we're speaking with psychologists and experts, they get it, and what they really like about it is the simplicity of it, that anybody can pick it up and start to engage with it.
And it is private. I choose who I want in my circle, and that information remains in that domain. So even if an employer or an organization is sponsoring this, the participant is in control, correct?
Yeah, that was one of the things we learned right away, was that there is no way I'm going to participate in this unless I know that I'm the only one who can control my data. So yeah, so even if it's a company sponsoring it, there's no data going back to the organization, and it's all about giving that individual the autonomy to build their inner circle. And we're working with employers to make it work for them as well. So we've learned that individuals don't mind organizations seeing, like, if they're using the app or not. What they don't want is anybody seeing what's going in terms of what they're putting in. So we're kind of striking the balance of making it useful for an employer, because we need to make it useful for an employer if they're going to sponsor it for their staff, but also to make sure that the individual feels 100% certain that their data is their data. And so there's obviously a big backlash right now around data and how it gets used with social media. And so that, we've taken the business model of, where instead of selling advertising, we're going to charge for the service itself and keep the data secure, private, and we're never doing anything with the data other than letting you see what's going on with yourself and your friends and family.
As somebody that uses data for health underwriting, I am very happy to hear that. It is amazing what you can find out about people, and what people just let randomly drop into the public sphere, and how much data is for sale, which is an entirely different show we may have to do, because it is, as an individual, it's horrifying. As somebody that needs to create pricing structures, it's fabulous. And how we manage that is really, really important, and should not be I don't think should be the last part of the conversation. But certainly not with somebody's mental well-being.
Yeah, that was one of the things that became very clear to us immediately. The solution is so simple, but the psychological barrier is real, and we need 100% certainty that folks feel comfortable, or else they won't do it. So that's been very important to us.
I want to circle back to how quickly you iterated this thing, because I work with manufacturers and different kinds of businesses, and not a lot of SaaS, right? Not a lot of software as a service companies, but this seems to have come to market and just kind of lit itself on fire so quickly. How are you and Lorenzo managing the focus between this and your other businesses? Because that is often a challenge for employers.
Yeah, so this is a cycle that you wouldn't want to do all the time. That's number one. It's a sprint for sure. So, we're doing 2 full-time gigs at the same time as we're doing this. So in the initial stages is like a part-time thing. We're doing Google Forms just to see like, will anybody actually use this thing? Then, as you see more progress, you put more time and energy into it until, leading up to the launch, it was literally a 2 full-time job kind of thing. So, you balance it, I think, by understanding that if you want to do something like that, it is going to be a sprint, and you're going to have to put in more time while you're doing it so that the other things still get taken care of. And then as it's launched and as it's gaining traction, add resources to it so that you can slowly, kind of get back to normal, and regain your sanity, because it's super stressful to be wrestling with what everybody is wrestling with right now and have all those demands going on. But when you view it as a short-term thing and plan for it to be a short-term thing, it becomes bearable.
I would agree with that. And I think not everybody outside of the SaaS world kind of understands the sprint concept, where you're literally working in a couple of week increments, correct? We're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and iterating as you move along that curve.
Yeah, you take things in very short chunks, because you don't know what's going to happen. If you create a plan for 6 months, that plan is garbage by the end of 2 weeks, and you got to make a new one anyway. So you kind of chunk off the next piece where it makes most sense to be working, and you work on that for a couple of weeks. But yeah, I think in terms of how we work as in the SaaS world as a sprint, if you're anybody listening that's in that world will know that as a term of art. But even just like in general, like we view it as a project. This is we're not going to work 2 full-time jobs for a year. It's a short-term thing that we're working through to get something new launched.
Before we wrap up, what would be your best piece of advice for somebody in bringing an idea like this to market? A new idea that's different from their existing business.
Find super inexpensive ways to test whether or not people will see value in it. Number one. Mm-hmm. So in our case, we literally spun up a free Google form and used that as a way to get initial feedback, and then keep building it out in chunks as you go along, as you start to see feedback. Because we made a lot of assumptions at the beginning that turned out to be not true, and we made many iterations even through those couple of months that we would not have been able to make if we just said, okay, here's the thing. We're going to build it. We know what it needs to be. And then you launch it and there's a whole bunch of problems with it. It's like even that, the privacy issue was, we thought this, you should do this with your team at work. And that's how we can bring mental health to the workplace. Well, that turned out to have a huge flaw in it, which is like, pardon my language, they would say, there's no way in hell we are sharing this information with our employer. And in fact, one of my good friends back home who's a lawyer, his first comment was, I wonder how I can use this to fire people. So like you make assumptions like that. And if you have the flexibility to deal with them as they come up, you're going to end up with something that works really well, but that nobody wants, or that nobody will use. And that's a bad place to be in.
Yes. So I think we will leave it there today. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us on the show. For those of you listening, thank you. We appreciate it. You find us wherever you are listening to this podcast, so pretty much everywhere. Please subscribe if you found value in it. If you could leave a review, that will help us spread the word, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Raising the Bar is powered by Altiqe Consulting, the country's leading independent expert in healthcare cost containment. Astute employers know there's a better way to offer health insurance, and we help them achieve it.